When did a paternity test destroy an entire marriage? Right in the waiting room? Story 1. I was sitting in the waiting room with my wife and our 8-year-old son, holding her hand while nervously bouncing my leg. We had agreed to the paternity test after my mother made some nasty comment about our son looking too different. I didn't believe it. Not really, but I wanted to shut her up. The nurse came out, clipboard in hand, and asked, "Mr. Daniels?" I stood up. She handed me the results in a sealed envelope. My wife gave me a nervous smile. But there was something else, a flicker of fear. I opened the envelope in front of her. Then I read the first line. "The alleged father is excluded as the biological father." I looked at her. She froze. "What is this?" I asked, the words barely escaping my mouth. She stuttered. It has to be a mistake." I didn't speak. I just looked down at our son, who was innocently kicking his legs, clueless. My world cracked in half. Then she tried to whisper something about a friend from college. I didn't let her finish. I just walked out of the room. I could hear her crying, following me, begging me not to leave. Security had to step in when she tried to block the doors. She destroyed everything with one lie, and it unraveled right there, between magazines and vending machines. Story 2. I worked at a private DNA testing clinic for a year, and the wildest thing I ever saw happened during a routine paternity confirmation. The couple was married, mid-40s, clean-cut, polite. The supposed child was a 22-year-old man who looked just like the father. It was honestly hard to believe they were testing it at all. They said it was just for legal documentation, immigration stuff, inheritance, whatever. 2 weeks later, they came back for the results. I handed over the report in the envelope. The dad opens it. His face drops. He looks at the mom. He just whispers, 22 years. The son, confused, says, "What? What's going on?" The dad starts laughing. Not angry laughter, just broken. You know what's funny? I raised him. I gave him everything, and now I find out I was just the ATM. The mom starts crying, tries to explain, but the son bolts out of the room. Dad doesn't follow. He tosses the paper in the trash and says, "I'm getting a lawyer." Then he turns to me and says, "They always said he didn't have my smile. Guess they were right." He left. She collapsed on the floor. We called emergency services. The family never came back. Story 3. My cousin Mark had always been kind of gullible. He married his high school sweetheart Tina right after she got pregnant at 19. He dropped out of college, worked 2 jobs, and basically dedicated his life to being a provider. Fast forward 11 years. Their daughter needed a rare blood transfusion after an accident. During testing, the doctors noticed that Mark's blood type made it impossible for him to be the biological father. He didn't say a word for 3 days. Then, he booked a private paternity test. He didn't tell Tina. He just scheduled it and brought her to the clinic under the pretense of insurance paperwork. When the nurse handed over the envelope, Mark opened it silently, right there in the waiting room. Not the father, the paper said, just like he expected. But what came next was nuclear. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just slid the envelope across to her and said, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Tina tried to play it off, calling it ancient history. But Mark, he stood up, called her parents to come pick her up, and walked out. Divorce was filed the next day. Full custody was granted 2 months later. He still loves the girl like his own. But his marriage? That ended before the ink dried on the test results. Story 4. It happened in my OB/GYN office. I was in for a routine appointment when this couple, early 30s, came in arguing quietly but intensely. I only caught bits of it. Something about a trust issue, and just wanting to be sure. The nurse called them in for a postnatal paternity test. Their baby had just been born 3 weeks earlier. About 20 minutes later, they came back into the waiting room. She was crying. He was holding the envelope like it was radioactive. He opened it slowly, then read, then looked at her. "You swore. You cried and swore on your mother's grave." She grabbed the paper and screamed, "It's not possible." But it was. He stood up, said nothing, and walked out. Just left her there sobbing in a room full of strangers. One of the nurses had to come hold her up because she literally collapsed. The next day, the front desk said he'd moved out and filed for divorce. Turns out she'd had a one-night stand with his best friend during her bachelorette weekend. That baby? 99.9% his best friends. I never forgot the sound of that envelope tearing, and how her life came apart with it. Story 5. I was 17 and worked part-time at a family DNA testing center. One Friday afternoon, I was cleaning up the front desk when a man stormed in with a baby carrier and a red folder. Behind him was a woman, late 20s, red-faced and sweating. She was clearly trying to calm him down, but he wasn't having it. He slammed the results on the counter and yelled, "Explain this!" The folder had the clinic's logo on it. I immediately got my supervisor. Turns out, the man had taken a paternity test without telling his wife. His suspicion? The baby was born while he was away on a 4-month overseas contract. He did the math. Things didn't add up. He wasn't the father. The paper confirmed it. In the waiting room, he just broke. He looked at the baby and said, "I sold my motorcycle for her crib. I painted her room. I wrote letters to her before she was born." She kept repeating, "It was only once. I didn't think." He turned, handed her the baby and said, "Give her to the real father." Then walked out. We all just stood there, stunned. The baby started crying. So did everyone else. Story 6. I was a family therapist, and part of my job involved mediating emotionally charged moments. One day, a couple came in for a final session before deciding whether to divorce. The issue? Trust. Particularly the husband's belief their youngest child might not be his. They'd already done the paternity test privately, but agreed to open the results with me in the room for emotional safety. The wife was confident. "This is just to shut him up," she joked. He said nothing, just stared at the envelope. When he opened it and read, he didn't yell, didn't flinch. He calmly slid the paper across the coffee table. She picked it up, her face drained of color. She reread it 3 times, blinking hard like she could force the words to change. Her voice cracked. "It was one night, years ago. You didn't think I'd check," he said. "I just wanted you to tell me the truth, once." He stood up, shook my hand and said, "Thanks for trying." She collapsed into sobs. He walked out of our office, and by the time the session was technically over, he'd already called a divorce attorney. That moment didn't just end a marriage. It shattered her illusion that lies fade with time. Story 7. My older brother and his wife were the perfect couple. Beautiful, successful, Instagram-worthy. They had 2 kids and had been together since college. Then, out of nowhere, he asks for a paternity test on their youngest. Apparently, during a work party, a friend drunkenly joked that the baby looks nothing like him. That planted the seed. My brother paid for a discreet test. They went to the clinic together. She was annoyed, but went along. 2 weeks later, the results were ready. They decided to open them in the waiting room to put this nonsense to bed. Except, it wasn't nonsense. He wasn't the father. He stared at the result like it was written in a foreign language. She immediately tried gaslighting him. "This is wrong. You saw me give birth." He didn't say a word. He just stood up, looked at her, and said, "Start packing. We're done." She screamed that he was throwing away our life over a test. He walked out without even turning around. Their divorce got ugly fast. Turned out the real father was her Pilates instructor. The one she swore was just a friend. Story 8. I used to do admin work at a medical center that partnered with a paternity lab. One day, we had a couple in their 50s come in for a test. They were all smiles, apparently doing this as a joke because their 30-year-old son had joked he looked more like the milkman. They brought him too, laughing about it the whole time. We drew samples, processed it, and told them results would be ready in 10 business days. When they came back in, the mood was different, tense. The father opened the envelope first. He stared at it, then handed it to his wife. She went white as a sheet. Their son looked confused. "What's going on?" The father looked him dead in the eyes and said, "I'm not your dad." The son laughed. "Okay, seriously, what does it say?" The father pulled out the paper and read aloud. "Probability of paternity, 0%. The son's face just broke. The mother started sobbing, swearing she never meant for it to go this far. She admitted to a fling with a man at work and had convinced herself the baby was her husband's. He stood up, put his wedding ring on the counter and said, 30 years, just gone, then walked out. They never spoke to each other again. Story 9. Back when I worked at a fertility clinic, we had a situation that haunts me. A couple had been struggling with infertility and finally got pregnant through IUI, intrauterine insemination. Months after the birth, the baby developed a rare genetic condition. The doctors tested both parents and realized something odd. The father's genetics didn't line up with the condition at all. It raised enough questions that they requested a paternity test through our partner lab. I remember when the couple came in for the results. The nurse tried to suggest a private room, but the husband insisted on reading them right there in the lobby. He scanned the document. Then again, and again. He stood up and said, in a voice so calm it was terrifying, "Who did you sleep with?" The wife started stammering. No one, I swear. It must have been a lab mix-up." But she was lying. Turns out she'd secretly had a one-night stand the same week as the procedure. Just in case the fertility treatment didn't work, she didn't want to waste another cycle. His words before walking out, "I could have handled infertility. I can't handle betrayal." She tried chasing him, but he told her, in front of everyone, "Tell the real father his daughter has a genetic disorder." Story 10. My best friend's dad found out the truth in the most awkward, public way imaginable. It was his 25th wedding anniversary, and his wife decided to renew their vows. As part of the celebration, she presented him with a silly gift, a framed paternity test confirming he was the father of their 3 kids. He laughed awkwardly. "Why would you test that?" She just smiled. "You know, for fun. To prove you had nothing to worry about." He looked at the paper. Something didn't sit right. He flipped to the second page, and his smile vanished. One of the kids, the youngest, wasn't his. In front of the whole family, he asked, "What the hell is this?" She turned pale. He stormed out. She tried to play it off. It's a misprint, a joke. But he wasn't buying it. He came back the next week with divorce papers and DNA tests for the other 2 children. One more came back negative. He left her, sold the house, cut ties. They went from celebrating 25 years together to barely speaking, all because she thought she could control the narrative with a bow-wrapped lie. Story 11. I was in the waiting room for my annual checkup when this couple came in with a toddler. The guy looked like he hadn't slept in a week, bags under his eyes, hands shaking. The woman was busy on her phone, not even acknowledging him or the baby. They were called in, but stayed just outside the nurse's office to open a large envelope they'd picked up from reception. It was clear, paternity results. I tried to mind my business, but when the guy gasped, the entire room looked up. "Are you serious right now?" he said, voice rising. She whispered something I couldn't hear. He snapped. 2 years I've been raising her. 2 years, and you knew? The woman tried to grab the envelope, but he pulled it away. "You told me I was paranoid," he said. "You made me feel insane for even asking." The baby started crying, sensing the tension. The man picked up his coat and said, "You lied every single day. I'm done." She chased after him, but he turned around and shouted, "Get the real dad to buy her diapers." I'll never forget how everyone in the room went dead silent, except for that crying baby. Story 12. My cousin Lisa worked at a hospital lab and told me about this absolute nightmare of a scene. A couple came in, mid-30s, to get results from a paternity test they'd ordered after the man suspected something was off with their second child. Their firstborn looked just like him. The second? Not at all. They sat in the waiting room with both kids, and the doctor handed over the sealed results. Lisa said the man opened the envelope and just sat there, reading it over and over. The woman got impatient and grabbed it. 0% probability of paternity, it read. He looked at her and whispered, "So who's his father?" She froze. "I don't know." "You don't know?" She tried to say it was a confusing time, that she had been going through things emotionally. That's when the first child piped up. "Are we going to McDonald's after this?" The man didn't answer. He just stood up and said, "I need some air." He never came back, literally ghosted his own family from the parking lot, packed a bag, stayed at a hotel, and filed for divorce within 48 hours. Story 13. I was friends with this guy named Derek, who was always the doting husband. Flowers, anniversary trips, the whole 9 yards. He and his wife had struggled with fertility for years. So when she got pregnant, he was over the moon. They did everything by the book. Nursery decorating, maternity photos, Lamaze classes. Fast forward 6 months after the birth, the baby looked nothing like him. His friends teased, but he ignored it. Then one day, he found an old message thread between his wife and her ex. It was dated 2 weeks before her positive test. He didn't confront her, just went straight to get a test. He brought her and the baby in for a routine pediatric follow-up at a clinic that offered discreet paternity testing. They sat in the waiting room when the nurse brought the results. He opened them in silence, then just muttered, "Okay." She asked, "What's okay?" He passed her the paper. She read it and immediately started crying. He stood up and said, "You wanted to start a family. I wanted to start one with you, but I won't build a family on lies." She begged him to stay. He walked out, turned off his phone, and never looked back. Story 14. My uncle's marriage exploded in real time at a clinic I worked at part-time in college. His wife had cheated years ago, but they moved past it. Then one day he noticed his teenage daughter had blue eyes, and neither he nor his wife did. He Googled it. Got suspicious. He told her he wanted a paternity test. Just to be sure. She agreed, a little too quickly. They showed up on a rainy Tuesday. I wasn't allowed to say anything because of policy, but I recognized them instantly. They didn't see me. When they opened the results in the waiting area, my uncle froze. The paper confirmed he wasn't the biological father. His hand trembled. Then he stood and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You let me name her after my mother." His wife tried to hush him. "She's 14, he said. "And you let me think she was mine for 14 years. He stormed out of the clinic, soaking in the rain. I found out later he didn't even go home that night. He stayed with a friend and never slept in the same house as his wife again. Story 15. I worked at a courthouse, and sometimes we'd witness absolute chaos during routine DNA results for child support cases. One particular day, this couple showed up. Well-dressed, professional, polished. The wife was calm, confident. The husband was cold, detached. He had requested a court-ordered test for their 4-year-old, citing doubts due to timing. The judge wasn't even needed for the reveal. The lab results were delivered to them in a shared waiting area. The husband opened the results, didn't react, just handed them to her. She read them, and for a second her smile twitched. "It doesn't change anything," she said. He leaned in and whispered, "It changes everything." Then he turned to the security guard near the metal detector and said, "Can I wait in the hallway?" He waited outside for a ride. She followed him, pleading. He didn't say a word. He just got in the car and left her standing there in heels, holding the manila envelope like it was a ticking bomb. 3 days later, she was served with divorce papers and a cease contact order. Story 16. I worked at a legal office that shared a waiting area with a paternity testing lab. One afternoon, a man in a military uniform sat nervously beside his wife and a newborn in a stroller. He'd just returned from an overseas deployment and something wasn't adding up about the baby's due date. He asked for the test under the guise of needing it for insurance purposes. She agreed, seemingly unbothered. When the results came, he opened the envelope slowly, then blinked a few times like his brain had stalled. "You said she was born early," he said quietly. She instantly looked away. "She was, number." "She wasn't," he replied. "She was full term. I was gone the whole time." He handed her the paper. 0% probability. She froze, then whispered, "It was a mistake. I thought you'd never come back." People turned to look. He stood up, adjusted his uniform, and simply said, "Then don't pretend I did." He walked out. She sat there, shell-shocked, rocking the stroller. The entire waiting room stayed silent for 10 straight minutes. Story 17. This happened to my coworker's brother. He and his wife had been together since high school, and they had 3 kids. The youngest looked completely different. Lighter skin, different features, but they always brushed it off as family genetics. He took all 3 kids for a fun DNA ancestry test one Christmas. But secretly, he added the paternity option. The results came back, and the youngest wasn't his. He didn't confront her at home. Instead, he asked her to go with him to the clinic where the test was verified. She thought it was about correcting a paperwork error. They sat in the waiting room. He handed her the envelope and said, "Want to open it together?" She laughed and ripped it open. Her face changed completely. He asked, "Do you want to tell me, or should I guess?" She stammered something about a mistake years ago, claiming it was before they were married. But the child's age didn't match that story. He looked at her and said, "This kid is 7. We've been married 11 years. She tried to spin it, but he already had bags packed at home. That moment wasn't about yelling. It was about confirmation. And walking away. Story 18. I used to volunteer at a women's shelter, and one of the strangest stories I heard came from a former client. She had gotten married very young, 19, and had 2 kids with her husband. They seemed happy, but he was always oddly jealous of her friendships with coworkers. One day, during a family picnic, someone made a joke about how their younger son looked like her old manager. Her husband laughed, but she said his eyes darkened. A week later, he scheduled a paternity test behind her back. She found out when they were sitting in a pediatric waiting room, and he pulled out an envelope. "I did a test," he said. "I had to know." She was furious, until he showed her the paper. He wasn't the father. Her voice caught. "Wait, what?" She genuinely didn't know. Turns out she had been assaulted by that manager during a work retreat, but had repressed and dismissed the possibility that anything came from it. That paper didn't just destroy her marriage. It tore open trauma she never processed. He walked out without another word. She never saw him again. Story 19. I was doing my clinical rotation in nursing school when we had a family come in for what was supposed to be a genetic screening consultation. The husband had booked it after their son was diagnosed with a hereditary blood disorder, one neither parent supposedly had a history of. During intake, the wife seemed on edge. The husband was calm but quiet. I noticed he didn't fill out part of the consent form, the biological father section. The doctor came in, explained the results, and then dropped the bombshell. The father's DNA doesn't match the child's condition. In fact, there's no genetic relationship. The husband nodded, unsurprised. He pulled out a folder. "I already knew. I had a test done last month. This was just to see if she'd finally admit it." The wife looked like she'd been shot. He said, "I stayed for 5 years hoping you'd tell me. You let me donate blood, tissues, even part of my liver, thinking I was saving my son, but I was just your cover." He walked out, leaving her sobbing, and the doctor stunned. I still think about that one. Story 20. My old roommate's brother went viral on TikTok, but not for the reason he wanted. His wife was a family influencer. constant videos of their baby, parenting advice, TikTok trends. One video trend going around at the time was surprising your husband with paternity test results to prove him wrong. She made the video without telling him. In the clip, she gave him an envelope as he sat in a waiting room after a pediatric checkup. She was laughing behind the camera, saying, "This'll shut you up." He opened it, read it, looked at her. He didn't laugh. Then he stood up, tossed the envelope in her lap, and said, "So it really was the neighbor." The camera dropped. The video went black. She deleted her account within 24 hours. He moved out the next day. Turns out he'd suspected for months and told her multiple times. She mocked him, then tried to turn his paranoia into content. That test destroyed not just their marriage, but her entire internet persona. Story 21. I was at a lab for blood work when I witnessed the single most awkward silence in my life. A man in his late 40s was pacing near the front desk. His wife sat still, holding their teenage son's hand. The kid looked like he just wanted to vanish. The man kept muttering, "Just a formality. Just a formality." Then the nurse came out with an envelope. The man grabbed it, tore it open, scanned the document, and froze. Number no way. He stared at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. The wife stood. "Honey, don't," he said. "You had me raising someone else's kid for 15 years?" The kid sat there wide-eyed. She whispered, "It was before you and I were official. I didn't know who." "You knew," he snapped. "You just hoped I'd never check." The nurse tried to calm him down, but it was too late. He looked at the boy and said, "I'm sorry, I thought you were mine." Then he walked out. His son broke down crying, and his wife chased after him. The worst part? It wasn't even the kid's fault, but his whole life changed in one hallway conversation. Story 22. A friend of mine worked as a counselor for couples going through IVF and related fertility treatments. One day, she told me about a case that broke her heart. A couple in their late 30s had struggled with infertility for years. They finally got pregnant through donor insemination, but agreed it would be the husband's sperm used for IUI. Months after the birth, they were in the clinic waiting for test results. Not because they suspected anything, but to check for hereditary markers for a condition the baby was showing symptoms of. My friend sat nearby when the results were handed to the husband. He looked confused. There must be a mistake. Then he looked at his wife. "They used someone else's sample." Her face fell. "No," she said. "I panicked. Your sample didn't make it in time. I didn't want to wait another cycle." He was stunned. "So you used someone else's without telling me?" She nodded silently. It wasn't just about biology. It was betrayal, consent, trust. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood, looked down at the baby and said, "He deserves better. So do I." That was the last time they saw each other in that clinic. Story 23. I used to work as a receptionist in a small-town medical office. You see everything in a job like that. One afternoon, a very posh-looking woman stormed in, dragging her husband behind her. She looked furious. He looked nervous. Turns out, he had secretly done a paternity test on their second daughter, and the lab had called to say the results were ready. He hadn't told his wife. When the nurse handed him the envelope, he opened it right there in the waiting room. She leaned over to read it too. Then came the gasp. "Negative?" she said. "What does that even mean?" He just stared at her, white as paper. She shrieked, "Are you saying you think I cheated on you?" "I didn't think," he said. "I knew." She slapped the envelope out of his hand. "That's not your daughter, then whose is she?" That's when the receptionist realized something insane. The wife hadn't cheated, but he had, and confused his own blood type history with someone else's. Turns out he wasn't the biological father of either of the two kids, because he had secretly gotten a vasectomy in college. He thought it had failed. Nope, the kids were never his. He just never told her. She filed for divorce a week later. Story 24. I was part of a friend group where one couple, Jenna and Mark, were known as relationship goals. They had one daughter and had been together since their freshman year in college. One night at a party, someone jokingly said their daughter looked just like Mark's roommate from back in the day. Mark laughed awkwardly but got weirdly quiet after. A few weeks later, they went to a clinic for a routine health screening, which was really a secret paternity test Mark had arranged. In the waiting room, they were holding hands when the nurse brought the envelope. He opened it and said, "Tell me it's wrong." Jenna read it. She didn't deny it. "I was drunk. We were fighting. It was only once," she said. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just stared at her. Then he got up and said, "You let me fall in love with someone who was never mine." He walked out. She chased after him, leaving behind the envelope and her illusion of a perfect life. Story 25. My neighbor's son, Ryan, learned the truth about his identity in the most heartbreaking way possible. His dad, Dave, was a trucker, often on the road. When Ryan was 10, Dave came back early from a long haul to surprise the family. Instead, he found a man's jacket on the couch. He never confronted his wife, just started sleeping in the guest room and booked a paternity test. Quietly, they went to the clinic under the pretense of testing for school enrollment records. When the envelope arrived, Dave insisted they open it together in the waiting room. Ryan was there too, playing on a tablet. Dave read the paper, exhaled, and turned to his wife. "You cheated while I was burying my father?" Her face flushed. It was a mistake. He looked down at Ryan. "I love you," he said, "but I need to talk to your mom alone." He sent Ryan to the vending machines. 10 minutes later, Dave walked out, alone. He left the marriage, the town, everything. But every Christmas, he still sends Ryan a gift. Because sometimes, even when it breaks you, love doesn't end with DNA. Story 26. I worked at a paternity testing center during college, and one day a man came in with his wife and what I assumed was their infant son. He was all smiles, bouncing the baby, telling jokes. The wife, though, silent, eyes darting. They'd come for peace of mind, he told us. No tension, no suspicion. Just to put the jokes to bed from their in-laws. The test had been done a week earlier. Now it was time for results. When I handed over the sealed envelope, he turned to his wife and said, "You open it. Let's make it official." She opened it slowly, read it, then just froze. He took the paper from her. His expression didn't change for a few seconds. Then he exhaled through his nose. 0%? The baby began to cry. "Is this a typo?" he asked. She didn't answer. He looked her in the eye and said, "I was so excited when he was born, you know. I even cried. You just let me live a lie." He kissed the baby's forehead, whispered something, and handed him back to her. "I'll love him," he said, "but I don't have to love you." Then he walked out. No screaming, no scene. Just devastation, silently folded in a sheet of paper. Story 27. My brother was always a little too trusting. He married his girlfriend of 6 months after she told him she was pregnant. They had their son, bought a house, settled into life. But one day, my brother came to me crying. He called me uncle, he said. Twice this week. He brushed it off until his wife made a weird comment. He's going to grow up tall, just like Derek. Derek being her ex. So, he booked a test behind her back. The results came in during a follow-up appointment for their son's allergies. She thought they were there to discuss medication. Instead, my brother pulled out the envelope and read it right there in the waiting area. She immediately knew. "It was just once," she said, barely above a whisper. He looked at her, then the kid. "You had a whole year to tell me. You let me name him. You let me believe." She cried, tried to grab his hand. He backed away. "He's innocent, you aren't." Then he asked the receptionist for directions to the nearest hotel. Story 28. I was a nurse in a pediatric clinic, and we had a routine paternity confirmation scheduled for travel documents. The dad was getting a new job overseas and needed to prove the child was his to file the visa. The mother came in with a cheerful toddler. The father was visibly tense. He didn't talk much, just nodded. The results came in that day, earlier than expected. I asked if they wanted to wait for a private room, but the father insisted on opening the envelope right there. He opened it, paused, read it again. Then he passed the paper to her, without saying a word. She read it, then said, "Well, I thought you'd leave if I told you the truth." He blinked. "So you let me plan a whole life around this lie?" "I didn't think it would matter once we were happy," she said, shrugging like it was nothing. That was when the man finally broke. "He's not mine. I just wasted 4 years of immigration prep on someone else's child." He stood up and said, "You know what? File the visa with the real dad." Then walked out, suitcase and all, leaving her there in stunned silence. Story 29. I had a client during my time as a divorce paralegal who went through a very public unraveling of his marriage. His wife brought him to a clinic for what she claimed was a genetic compatibility screening, but it was actually a setup. She was trying to prove he wasn't the father so she could get a divorce with custody. She figured if she could get him to read the results publicly and then react badly, she'd win the court of public opinion. So, he got the envelope in the waiting room, smiled, opened it, and froze. Then he chuckled. "Wow," he said, "so that's your move." The room went quiet. "You slept with someone else, got pregnant, and waited 2 years to weaponize it." She tried to hush him. "Let's not make a scene." He stood up and calmly said, "No scene, just truth." He turned to everyone watching and said, "She tricked me into fatherhood, and now she wants me to pay for her lie." He walked out, hired our firm the next day, and won full custody by proving her manipulative tactics. Story 30. I used to teach biology at a high school and one day assigned a basic genetics project. Blood types, Punnett squares, etc. One student, a quiet girl, came to my desk after class and asked, if my parents are both type O, is it possible for me to be AB? I gently said no. She went quiet, thanked me, and left. 3 weeks later, her parents showed up at school to speak to administration. Apparently, the girl had asked for a paternity test and insisted they all go to a clinic together. They came to the appointment, sat down, got the envelope, opened it. The father was not the father. The mom immediately burst into tears. The father didn't say a word. He just stood up, handed the girl his keys, and said, "Wait in the car." He then calmly looked at his wife and said, "You've got 5 minutes to explain 20 years of lies." She couldn't. Not really. The marriage ended a week later, all sparked by a high school assignment and one brave girl asking the right question. Story 31. I was sitting across from this couple in the clinic, mid-20s, very young. The guy was bouncing his leg so hard the floor vibrated. The girl sat there with her arms crossed, defensive before anything had even started. A nurse called them over, handed the guy a sealed envelope, and walked away. He opened it without hesitation. His expression didn't change, but the silence was heavy. He passed her the paper. She didn't read it, just said, "I already know what it says." "Then why didn't you tell me?" he asked, still calm. "Because you were happy," she said, "and I needed to be loved." He nodded slowly. "So you used me to feel good about your own mistakes?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "But it did," he said. "And now I can't unlove a child who isn't mine." She finally looked at the paper. Her face crumbled. He stood up, looked around the room like he'd forgotten where he was, and said, "I need to think." Then he left. She didn't follow him. Story 32. My friend's dad discovered the truth in the worst way, by trying to prove a conspiracy theory wrong. His son, my friend, had done one of those ancestry kits and found some weird matches, like relatives from a completely different ethnic background. They laughed it off until the dad started obsessing, convinced the kit was flawed. So he decided to debunk it once and for all by getting an official paternity test at a clinic. They brought the whole family to the appointment. Yes, seriously. Wife, son, even the younger siblings. In the waiting room, the dad got the envelope, grinning like a man about to say, "Told you so." He opened it. Smirk faded, reread. Then again, the smile was gone. He turned to his wife and said, "Care to explain?" She looked terrified. "Who's his father?" he asked, pointing to his son. She just whispered, "I thought it was you." "I really did." He laughed bitterly. "What about the other two?" She didn't answer. He handed the envelope to his son, got up and said, "None of this was ever real, was it?" Then walked out of the clinic and out of their lives. Story 33. One of the saddest cases I ever saw happened while working front desk at a private testing center. An elderly man, probably late 60s, came in with a middle-aged woman and a grown man who looked to be in his 30s. Turned out, the woman had finally confessed that her son might not be her husband's biological child, and he insisted on getting tested. Decades later, they sat silently while waiting. When the results arrived, he asked me to open them. The words were short. Not the biological father. The old man didn't cry, didn't yell. He just looked at his wife and said, "All those Father's Days, every one of them." A lie. The son stood up. "I don't care what that paper says. You raised me." But the man shook his head. "I needed the truth. Now I have it, and I don't know what to do with it." The wife tried to reach for him. He flinched. They left separately. I'll never forget the way that man looked as he walked out, like he had just lost 30 years of his life in a single page of paper. Story 34. I used to moderate a parenting forum, and one day a post popped up titled, "My husband found out the truth in the waiting room." She explained how she'd cheated during a separation but got back together with her husband soon after. When she got pregnant, the timing was close enough that she convinced herself the baby was his. 5 years later, the child developed a rare disorder and needed a donor match. The husband volunteered, but he wasn't compatible. That was red flag number 1. They scheduled a DNA test at a local clinic. She swore she wasn't worried, until the moment he opened the envelope in the waiting room. He didn't speak. She wrote, "He just looked at me, not even angry, like I was a stranger." Then he said, "All I ever asked was for honesty." She begged. He stood, walked to the nurse's desk, handed her the envelope. "Let the real father save him," he said, then left. She posted the story to ask for forgiveness advice. Every single commenter said the same thing. "You don't get to ask that now." Story 35. My coworker had been trying to adopt his wife's son legally, so they had to do some paternity-related paperwork. It was mostly formality, until the lawyer told them the system flagged a discrepancy. Just to be sure, they ordered a full DNA report. They came to the clinic together. I was working front desk when they checked in. She was bubbly, laughing, telling him how excited she was for the last step. The results arrived, and he opened them right there in the lobby. His smile dropped. He stared at her, then showed her the paper. She tried to smile through it. That's not possible. You've been here the whole time. He looked at the paper again. I'm not the father. Not even close. Then added, but the timeline matches. Your old boss. She didn't deny it. I wanted a family, he said. You gave me a lie. He placed the paper down gently, kissed the little boy on the head and said, I'll always be your friend. Then left before she could even get up. Story 36. My older sister's husband, Joel, was the sweetest guy. The kind who cried at commercials and wrote handwritten love letters. When their baby girl was born, he was overjoyed. Even though I noticed something odd. The baby had striking green eyes, and neither Joel nor my sister did. He ignored it. But 3 years later, his work required a family medical history for dependents. Something about her blood type raised flags. Quietly, he booked a paternity test. He told my sister they were doing a pediatric allergy screening. She smiled the whole time. In the waiting room, the nurse handed over the results. Joel opened them, and I saw him flinch like he'd been hit. No relation, the paper said. He passed the envelope to my sister without a word. Her smile faded. Joel, I didn't know for sure. Didn't know? He asked. Or hoped you'd never have to. The baby started whining. He crouched down and hugged her, then stood up, tears in his eyes. I'll always love her, he said, but I can't keep loving you. He walked out without raising his voice. He filed for divorce the same week. Still sends birthday cards to the girl, but he never looked my sister in the eye again. Story 37. I was in med school when a couple came into our clinic for genetic testing. They were both med students too, and wanted to plan ahead for future pregnancies. It was cute, honestly. But somewhere during the consultation, the guy requested a paternity test, just to be thorough for their 6-month-old. His girlfriend laughed nervously but agreed. They came back for results a week later. We offered a private room. He declined. He read the paper out loud. Alleged father, excluded. She froze. He said, You told me we were both virgins, that this was our first. She stammered. It was our first real relationship. You cheated before we were even official? He asked. And let me fall in love with a lie? She tried to argue that it was early days, that she didn't want to ruin things. He stood up, looked at the baby, then back at her. I would have loved him no matter what if you had told me the truth, he said. But now I don't know who you are. He left her crying in the middle of a full waiting room. Story 38. I worked security at a courthouse where we often had paternity cases come in. Usually the drama unfolded behind closed doors. But one day, a man and woman were waiting outside the judge's chambers when they received the test results early from the clerk. He opened the envelope while still sitting in the hallway. She leaned over, read it, then slapped him. You set me up, she screamed. He stood, calmly. I asked you every year, he said. You swore, you cried, you lied. The paper confirmed it, not the father. He'd raised the boy for 9 years, paid for daycare, medical bills, even private school, all while being lied to. You knew the truth, he added. You just wanted a provider. Their argument became so loud I had to escort them out. He didn't file for custody, because legally he wasn't the dad. But he fought for visitation anyway. He told me later, I didn't lose a son. I lost a liar. Story 39. One of my patients was a single mom who came in crying one morning. She'd just come from a DNA testing center with her now ex-husband. He had requested a test after their son started asking questions about why he looked different. She'd always told herself that it didn't matter, that biology wouldn't change anything, but the test result did. She told me how they opened the envelope in a small clinic waiting room. Her husband didn't scream, didn't cry. He read it, then whispered, I loved you both more than anything. She said she tried to say something, anything, but the words stuck. He just stood up, looked down at the floor and said, If you had told me 10 years ago, I would have stayed. Then he left, not angrily, just gone. Now she sits by the window every night hoping someday he'll show up again. But he hasn't. Story 40. This guy in my apartment building, quiet dude named Sam, found out the truth about his marriage in the most public way possible. He and his wife went viral on social media for their cute family dances with their toddler. One day, she suggested doing a DNA reaction video, just for laughs. They got tested at a nearby lab and filmed the whole thing, including the moment they opened the envelope. Except Sam didn't laugh. He looked at the camera, then at her and asked, You knew? The screen cut to black, video deleted. But someone had screen recorded it. It blew up on TikTok. Turns out she'd been sleeping with a coworker during a work trip. Sam suspected nothing, until the test confirmed it. He moved out that night, deleted every photo, shut down his accounts. She tried to spin the narrative online, but no one bought it. The only thing left of their perfect family was a 30-second clip of Sam's heart breaking in real time. Story 41. My cousin Matthew had been married for almost a decade when things started to feel off. His wife, Erica, started locking her phone, working late, and brushing off their intimacy. Then their son was born. Matthew noticed right away the baby didn't have his features. Darker complexion, different hair, nothing in common. Erica insisted, babies change. Still, he couldn't let go of the doubt. Eventually, he booked a private paternity test without telling her. When the results were ready, he asked her to come with him to the clinic, pretending it was about the baby's insurance paperwork. They sat in the waiting room. He was shaking. She was scrolling Instagram. The nurse handed over the envelope. Matthew opened it. One line destroyed his entire world. Probability of paternity, 0%. He said nothing, just handed it to her. She read it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Then finally, it was just once. You were distant. He stood up, laughed quietly, and said, you blamed me for being distant while carrying another man's baby? He left, quiet, final. She tried calling, texting, showing up. He never responded. Story 42. A woman I knew through church used to brag about her perfect marriage. Her husband was a police officer, quiet and stoic, but clearly loved her and their 2 sons. Then the youngest got sick, and the doctors needed matching blood from the father. That's when it all started unraveling. He wasn't a match, which wasn't possible given the mother's blood type. He didn't say anything. He scheduled a full paternity panel for both boys and asked her to meet him at the testing center. She walked in smiling, clearly thinking this was just a mix-up. When the results were ready, the nurse handed them over in the waiting room. The husband read the results. Both boys, 0% match. He looked up at her. She whispered, don't do this here. I already did, he said. You cheated twice, lied for over a decade. She tried to justify it. You were never home. It was complicated. He stood up and said loud enough for the whole clinic to hear, 2 kids, 2 different fathers, but I was the only one paying the price. He walked out. She fainted on the spot. Story 43. I was 19 and working at the front desk of a lab when a teenage couple came in. They couldn't have been older than 17. The girl was holding a baby. The guy had the stiffest posture I'd ever seen. They were there for a court-ordered paternity test related to child support. I expected drama. Instead, it was heartbreak. When the results came in, the guy read them silently, then whispered, I knew it. She said, it doesn't mean you can't be involved. He shook his head. You told me he was mine. You begged me not to leave. I didn't know for sure. That's not what you said the night he was born. He looked at the baby and said, I wanted to be his dad. I was willing, but not like this. Not with a lie. He walked out without yelling, without even looking back. She just sat there, rocking the baby and crying. And I, a clueless teen, realized that sometimes heartbreak is quiet. Story 44. I was shadowing a hospital social worker when a couple in their 50s came in with their adult daughter. The daughter had always looked a bit different. Lighter skin, softer features, but everyone assumed it came from an obscure relative. The family had done a DNA test for fun. They wanted to explore their ancestry. But when the results arrived, the father noticed something off in the shared data. So he requested a formal paternity test, just to be sure. His wife was oddly supportive, maybe even overconfident. They received the envelope at the clinic, and the father opened it. Silence. He looked at his wife, then at the daughter, then back. I'm not your father, he said slowly. The daughter froze. Wait, what? He turned to his wife. Did you really think I'd never find out? I didn't know for sure, she blurted. It was one night, a long time ago. The daughter ran out in tears. The man whispered, I raised her. I loved her. You lied every single day. He walked out behind his daughter. The wife never stood up. Story 45. A friend of mine was a paramedic who got called to a clinic for a fainting episode. When he got there, the story unfolded fast. Apparently, a man and woman had just received paternity test results in the waiting room. The woman collapsed when her husband opened the envelope. He didn't scream. He just sat there, stunned. My friend told me he was holding the paper in one hand and a baby blanket in the other. She said she was loyal, the man muttered. Said I was the only one. The staff tried to calm her down. She was sobbing uncontrollably. She's not even a year old, he said. I painted her nursery. I picked her name. My friend asked if he wanted medical attention too. The man just shook his head and said, "No, I just need to go home and unlove someone." That line haunted my friend. It haunts me too.